scarcity of funds, our banking system has collapsed, and all the rest. But the number of VC deals in clean tech have actually been rising. So as a percentage of clean tech deals in the year 2009, if you look at this carefully, there's only about 4,900, let's say, or 800 VC deals in total, and about 3,000. That's like close to 60% are in clean tech. That's a huge number. And this comes from an overhead that was prepared by the Clean Tech Group. But if you look at three areas of venture capital investment, that is, with which to compare clean tech. If you look at biotech, software, medical devices, and equipment, which are the red, green, and purple lines here, clean tech is actually a higher percentage of all VC investment in the United States than either of these three categories. So that's also very, very interesting. And if you're interested in clusters, in the journal article, the Wall Street Journal article, they talked about creation of employment. And that's really what from a public policy perspective, we're interested in creation of new industries, new businesses, employment creation. The Wall Street Journal article, if I recall correctly, said that there's something like 50,000 jobs have been created in the Bay Area around clean tech. So, and the other thing that I think is interesting is a larger share of global mergers and acquisitions also have been in the clean tech area. It's not as striking as in the other areas, but we do need this learning variable, which is mergers and acquisitions. There have been very few IPOs in general in venture capital, and very few IPOs with regard to clean tech. But so M&As, a lot of the venture capital companies or the startups, after they get venture capital funding, their goal is to have somebody buy them out. and that's considered a success. I mean, a real success would be having an IPO and have lots of people invest in them, but a success would be an M&A, and that number has also been going up. And you see that the kinds of investors who have been involved. Now, one thing that I've noticed as I have looked at this data is that there are vast numbers of deals, but even the biggest investors, firms like Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers, which brought us the internet revolution, essentially, the information technology revolution, which is responsible for many of those companies, and Kozla, who used to work for Kleiner Perkins and Caulfield, even these people who are intensely involved in this sector are not doing huge numbers of deals, which is interesting. It's very dispersed among large numbers of investors. And another project that we started talking about this weekend, but became very interesting as we talked about it, because there's this interesting literature in the finance literature about syndication among these people. So some of the investors are one investor invests in one company. Sometimes a bunch of investors, that's what syndication is, will get together and invest in one company. Sometimes you will have only investors only will syndicate. Some will do both. So you really have all three. And you can talk about degrees of risk-taking. And you can talk about first versus second versus third stage and degrees of syndication. And there is a literature about that in the finance literature, which is kind of interesting that we've been looking at. But in any case, these are the kinds of investors. And what you also see happening in terms of doing the mergers and acquisitions is a lot of major companies are also investing. And it's an interesting list when you look at this list of major companies that are investing. Now, the companies are doing, they're both acquiring other companies. Siemens has been a big acquirer. And they're also, they are acting as VCs in the sense that they're doing venture capital, providing venture capital. And it's a very interesting list because some of these companies, you could say that they're kind of like the rest of high-tech Google. They're migrating into this area. But some of these companies, PG&E, that's an electric utility, that kind of makes sense. Siemens kind of makes sense. Oil companies, but Coca-Cola? I mean, it's an interesting group of companies that have also got involved. Okay, the other thing that one must be aware of, and this is a problem with what I'm going to show you today, when you look at it at the country level, is that most of the action is in the U.S. By amount invested, it's something like 82%, and by number of deals, it's 68%. The types of investments that are made, venture capital as a whole is mostly a U.S. phenomenon, so this is not surprising. the way it's structured in the US and the way it's structured in other countries is somewhat different. There is a literature that's out there about how venture capital on the US model has been spreading to the rest of the world, particularly to Asia. The US model is much more similar to the Asian model, but it's not as well developed in Asia as it is in the United States. And in Europe, what you find is more the banks are involved. In the US, it's endowments, it's pension funds, it's insurance companies. It's a different set of people who are giving their money to the VCs to invest. And so that's a big part of it. And we're risk takers in the world. That's our role. And this is a list from the Clean Tech Group of the companies most likely to succeed, the companies that have already started out here. They have a list of 100, and you can see most of them are in the US. There are a couple other countries that have significant numbers of companies that are involved. And in the United States, not surprisingly, California leads the way by a significant amount. And in the other states that are involved at a high level are Texas. This is not an American state, although sometimes I think it is. And I'm going to talk about Ontario a little bit later, and Massachusetts, British Columbia, and you can see again also in terms of by number of deals that California dominates. And according to Clean Tech Group, most of the companies that are most likely to succeed are in California. So this is again my interest in regional clusters. Now I have to do a little commentary in the middle of this, and since this is a public policy forum. And this is a map that was put together for one of the Clean Tech presentations with Deloitte, and the heat map of U.S. investment so far. And as you can see that California is very hot, and you can see that Texas is pretty hot, Massachusetts is pretty hot, and the other states in the Pacific Northwest are pretty hot. Us? Not too hot, and that personally, again, it depends. Maybe we're just wise, and we're avoiding something that's a boondoggle and it's not going to go anywhere. And we have smarter investors, but you can interpret that in a different light as well. That we're really missing out on something that's quite important. And so now I'm going to go into a little bit of a political commentary here about Minnesota.
But do we have BC in the first place?
Well, that is the issue, and I'll come to that in a minute. Our VC community, I think, is exceptionally weak right now. And even if we're not talking about clean tech, if we're talking about medical technology, anything, we are in deep duty because of that. And I'll show you some statistics that support this notion. But what's interesting, I'm going to get to that a little bit roundabout. So this quarter, California, actually, the number of investments, new investments in California, has been falling. And compared to, if you look at North America, it's been rising, but in California, it has been falling. So maybe there's some leveling off going on in California. And this is what's very, very interesting if you've been following this area at all. China. The investments in China have been skyrocketing, and it's not only China, it's all over Asia. China, India, Korea, and Japan. The number of investments and the dollar amounts have been skyrocketing. Now, of course, they have lots of money, and we don't have any money. That always helps when you have a lot of money and you have some need to do something with it. And the global share of M&As, this purple part of the diagram, has also been rising. So that means that they've been buying other startups. They've been buying other startups in great numbers. Now, in this, I'm building a little argument here, a mini argument, a mini theme, and my bigger theme. But the Asian strength is mainly in manufacturing, as you can see by this global photovoltaic cell production numbers by region. China and Taiwan are almost 50% of manufacturing. If you include Asia, it's more than 50% of manufacturing of solar PV cells. But then, and you can't, I don't know if you can see this carefully, but I'll give you a summary of this statistic, is that cell production is very high, for example, in China, but actual installed capacity is very, very low, which suggests by ineluctable logic that the Chinese are sending a lot of these to countries that are consuming them in great proportion, like Spain, the US, and Germany. Where's Germany on this? Third from the bottom. Particularly Germany, the US and Spain, and all other countries, that they are exporting these in large fashion. And I'm trying to make a larger point. So this is my larger point. This is something that I put together this, and this goes to your point about VC money. This is us here in Minnesota. And actually, this is sort of astounding to me. Now, when I bought the clean tech group data, they also had patent data. And then they inconveniently removed that patent data because of a dispute with the people who were providing it about 2 months ago. So, I said I bought it with the assumption that I would get the patent data, and I've been in a little bit of a dispute with them about getting the patent data back. But in any case, when in the spring, when I was able to make, these are just raw numbers, okay? But if you look at Minnesota, look at all this patenting. We have huge intellectual capital here, and I've sort of broken this down a bit. The U owns a lot of this intellectual capital. 3M owns a lot of it. 3M patents everything in the world. But if you look at number of venture capitalists, we're almost as bad as Missouri, which is the worst state. And one of my colleagues who's working with me on this is from Missouri. Missouri has 3 patents. We have 997, but we only have 18 venture capitalists. And if you look, take a look at another. If we compare ourselves to Ontario, Canada, 997. About 1,100 patents, but in Ontario they have 71 venture capitalists, and they have lots of new venture investment, and they have lots of merger and acquisition activity going on, and lots of initial public offerings. This does not augur well for our future. And then if you look, this is my last thing that I think you can get out of this little, I mean, if you look at the proportions of Israel and California, these proportions rather than the absolute numbers, they look very much the same. And I would say that that's a relatively healthy environment where you have patents, you have startups, you have venture capitalists, venture investment mergers, and IPOs. But then, if you look at China, so remember I was talking about production and M&As, number of patents, 13 in total. Number of startups, 48. Venture capitalists, 82. Venture investment, 126. This is the bank, and they're not creating the intellectual property, or they're bankrolling it, and they're creating the companies. They're doing it. We're thinking about it. That's one way of, that's a crude way of putting it, yes.
Well, and I have a rough impression that patenting doesn't mean very much in China.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's what I would suggest too.
Sorry, what was it?
I just didn't think that people paid much attention to patents in China.
Well, they are a member of the TRIPS, and if you want to lean on them, they have to respond.
But I think that one of the good things about the research you're doing is that it's interdisciplinary in it. And my suggestion will be is this, that the one explanation you have given winners and losers and who are making gain, who are not.
Right.
There is a very important part, and this may have to do with altruism, which many people believe.
Yeah.
Oregon case you mentioned on it is,
Yeah.
but when you put that map on that, you look at that is, the important thing is the side is the diffusion and the demand. Because the demand in China for energy is incredible, you see. So, and their pollution level is very, very high on that part.
Totally agree.
So therefore, some of this is very focused on coal, steel, those kinds of production they are doing it. Second point is because they are manufacturing for the world, so they are manufacturing, developing, and they are focusing on the market where the export markets are.
Right.
You
Right.
see?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying.
I put a sinister pale over my mind.
But I'm just saying the behavior of the Minnesotan and the rest of the United States may not be as irrational as probably
There was actually an interesting Wall Street Journal article about that, about how this solar company in the U.S. kept trying to get advanced technology one step further. Now they're finally entering the market and they have some money to enter the market, but the Chinese are using old technology and just lowering the prices so fast through economies of scale that they can't even compete anymore. So they're thinking about licensing it to the Chinese.
I'm just curious. I mean, I understand co-location is critical for lots of business activity, but I'm still, and clearly the disjunction between the patents and the other numbers is striking.
It's very
Having
striking.
said that, it isn't. What is your theory about where venture capitals are located and where the focus of their activity is located? I mean, it seems to me that, you clearly wouldn't be surprised if something, happened in Edina and it was acted on by somebody in Ridgefield.
Yeah.
So and in California is one of the largest economies in the world, and maybe the venture capitalists are in Los Angeles, and that's farther away than Wisconsin. You see what
I mean, these are all kind of artificial, and things are moving around, and maybe even regional clusters have less significance than they might once have had in other circumstances. And
but do you have a theory, though, Alfie? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to hold you up, but
Yeah.
but why that number is so low? I mean,
you mean
the
in Minnesota?
VC
In
number.
Minnesota.
I mean, has it always been really low?
I think I don't know if I have a theory, so I have some factoids, if you will, that I can, like Piper Jaffray, for instance, is a major investor in clean tech. It's one of the largest investment banks doing this. But there are two things. They're pretty cautious, and a lot of the money that they're gathering together to invest in clean tech is going to California companies. They're not looking here. So there seems to be something in the putting the pieces together that's not happening here in the same way that there are startups here. There's some, but it's not happening in here's my take on that, and that would be a whole other talk. And,
Sure.
And I actually have thought about, I'm not answering your question, which is about regional economic, the role of clusters in economy's growth, and how clusters work in a global economy where people pull in money and move money all over the place. But I would say one of my theories about Minnesota is that, opposed to this view that we once had about the state, that it's a place where there's consensus and people work together, I think that in this energy area there has been dissensus, and I can talk about wind, and that would be a whole other talk, and a lack of capacity to work together. And the institutional environment is very, very critical, and specifically I would talk about transmission. The incapacity of us to get the wind from, and now the whole United States is opposed to that idea. Anyhow, the Northeast doesn't want to buy our wind, and we want to pay for it. So there's collective action problems here that I think are major. That I think that's a lot of what's going on. It doesn't completely explain it, and it may be another phenomenon, because I'm just answering with something I know.
It's not really fair to compare us to California or Texas when you look at transmission around wind. But I was curious about whether there is a Silicon Valley of clean tech, because I didn't read the article. I mean, is that what's happening in California?
Yes, in the Bay Area. I don't know to what extent, and this is something I think I've looked at here in Minnesota, is the extent to which there are these organizations that bring together public, private sector, intermediate organizations, and there are such organizations that exist here. And I wonder whether, there's this old thing about why Silicon Valley was successful and Route 128 was not successful in the long run, and the argument was that regional clusters in California are very decentralized, they're very fluid, there isn't a lot of legal obstacles. For example, in California, if you leave a company, you can take your intellectual property with you and start another business almost immediately. And in Massachusetts, you couldn't do that. So that's this fluidity that exists may explain some of it. But and I'm working on that. I thought too, but that may be for another talk. Okay. So And this is a paper that I just found very, very recently by these two guys, Samali and Sorensen, but it was kind of compelling about the problem of local provision of venture capital. So basically I said if you have a lot of patents, you get a lot of government support for it. If you don't have the entrepreneurial capital, it's just simply not going to happen. They were looking not at clean tech, they were looking at other kind of technologies. But this graph, which I think is very, very, well, if you force the lines properly, these are metropolitan statistical areas with VC money. These are the ones without it. This is new business startups. You can see the difference in their data if you force these lines carefully enough to fit the data. So I would suggest, and I don't have an answer to that question, is that I don't think that there's the VC money here that there once was. For whatever reason, I mean, you could say that, and this is again speculating a lot, it's something I thought about, but the very fact that we have so many large Fortune 500 companies who are operating globally and basically most of them still, to the extent that that's still possible, are giving employment for life, tends to create a very conservative environment. For, if people were really upset at 3M and they could walk away and take their intellectual property with them, we might have. And to the extent that this is happening here, well, Cargill has huge investments, by the way, in clean tech. To the extent that there's this company at Cargill that they've sort of invested in, not invested in, it's sort of a break off from the existing company. So I think and I think the U is problematic. From what I've heard is that because of our it's very, very hard for an engineering professor here to take the intellectual property that he or she has created and make a business out of it because of all this, we have to sign all the time, which, and I heard, this is anecdotal from a guy who's in the industry who has connections with Madison, and he said at Madison, in Wisconsin, they don't have these restrictions that they have here, and he's seen people in chemical engineering, they're CEOs of companies, and they're taking the intellectual property they developed as part of being at Madison and making companies out of it. So these are some of the factors. I haven't figured this one out, so I'm just, since I brought it up.
But the California, the governor, the legislature, they put in money.
Yes.
And big money, you see, even for the size of that. And they are going to get into some national trouble because the national government is just trying to not exempt California. So there's a public policy issue.
Yes, public policy is important. I'm going to come back to public. Of course, and obviously California has gone farther than any other state in supporting carbon reduction policies of one sort or another. So that's also, so it's the institutional environment, whether there's consensus, whether there's strong public policy support, all of these things I think play a role. But I haven't figured it out yet.
It's very interesting.
So I'm just going to now, I'm going to this preliminary results part. And this is preliminary, and I'm the first to admit it, because we don't have enough data points in it. And I'm comparing 15 countries, but you already know from what I've said that the United States is 70 to 80% of this action. So these are the 15 most active countries globally. I would add, if I was just looking at the years 2006 through 2009, I would add India and China to this list. But I have more consistent data for these countries for these years. And you can help me a little bit with this. And so my original question was the portfolio and how the portfolio has changed. And I was looking at wind, solar, biofuels, and energy efficiency. And so and I'll show you the graphs that I created. But basically, to give you a sense for the path movement, what happened in 2004 and 2005 is investors went away from wind. They moved out of wind, and they started investing much more heavily into solar and biofuels. 2007, 2008, biofuels, they moved away from biofuels, more investment in solar, and then 2008, 2009, solar investment has declined, and efficiency has kind of remained constant through the whole period of time. So if you go back, I'll give you what I think the findings are. So all this rest will be dressing on top of the findings. So if you go back to my original concepts of path dependence and learning, among these four portfolios, what I would argue, based on this, what I admittedly preliminary evidence, I would argue that efficiency and to the greatest extent, efficiency, to some extent, wind, have been path dependent. So regardless of the external M&As and IPOs, the successes and failures, regardless of economic circumstances, regardless of whether the economy has done well or poorly, energy prices have done well or poorly, there's been a steady path with regard to efficiency and wind, while solar and biofuels have been moving up and down in response, heavily into response to the public policy environment, well, not the public policy, to response to M&As and IPOs and economic circumstances, both energy prices and the global economy. And why is this so? Here's what I would argue, and this is again, I'm thinking this through. You forced me because I'm doing this to think this through. But I would argue that what's going on is, if you think about those four alternatives, you think about efficiency, if you think about wind, you think about biofuels, and you think about solar, the two that are closest to being competitive with conventional energy right now are, see if anybody's listening, efficiency and wind, right? And solar and biofuels, particularly solar, is the farthest away. And I'll show later on a graph that indicates it. So that my argument is that wind and efficiency are not affected that much by, they are on a path, and that path will continue because they're close to being commercializable. While solar is more affected by these external happenings around it and can be diverted from the path or enhanced. You also see enhancement based on the external circumstances. There's more learning and path creation, if you will, in the solar and the biofuels sectors. And this is very preliminary, I will tell you. So these are raw numbers, and what we're looking at is 15 countries. And this is what I was looking at, by the way. This part I did by myself. I don't want to blame my co-authors. This is very crude analysis, but I was just trying to get a feel for the data. So I did 15 country averages on their portfolios for these years. This is a percentage of deals in the category of the total clean tech energy deals in the category. So you can see that in 2005, there's a big upswing in solar. The biofuel portfolio goes up. The wind portfolio comes way down in that year. And the efficiency portfolio, all this whole period of time, it stays about steady. The whole period of time. You see in 2007, the biofuel portfolio begins to decline. And there's something that I'm not taking into account here that's obviously very important in the biofuel portfolio, which all of you are aware of, which is the big controversy of fuel versus food. And that's beginning to hit in this period of time. The wind portfolio makes a little bit of a jump in here. And then the solar portfolio makes a further jump in between 2000 and 2008, and then it declines in 2009. So you see much more movement up and down in the solar portfolio, a little bit more, less, but still movement up and down in biofuel, less in wind, and the least amount in the efficiency portfolio. And, excuse me, I'll go back one. To beat this to death, I show it to you again in another fashion over time. So this is the efficiency portfolio, the smoothest line. The wind portfolio, wind very, very high at the beginning, but then it declines and it sort of falls into a pattern of pretty steady pattern. Bio goes up in the early period and then comes down much more quickly than solar. Solar goes up and then goes up again and then comes down in the very, very last period. So that's the raw data that I'm looking at. These are the paths they're on. And my argument is going to be that with regard to solar and with regard to bio, there is learning, there is some evidence, and you'll see this evidence isn't really strong, but they're being influenced by what I call learning or external circumstances, while efficiency and wind resist some of the same external circumstances. They stay on this path.
Can you just restate the definition of efficiency portfolio? How you?
Okay, I'm defining it as of the total number of deals that are made. I'll go back one too. It's It's the deals in efficiency among all the clean tech energy deals that have been made. Those are my definitions. It's an average for 15 countries in these years. Okay? So it's a very crude measure. I must
Or
admit.
Mahmoud, was your question, what is efficiency?
Substantive.
Oh, what is
Could
efficiency?
you give us an example?
Oh,
Presumably
efficiency,
in the long
lighting.
run, yeah.
A lot of it's associated with buildings. Heating, and that's another thing about efficiency. There's the number of options are really great, and they're marginal incremental improvements, generally. A lot of them are building related. And they save
And
electricity.
they
A lot
are-
of this is, we're talking about saving electricity as opposed to, I don't know, I guess all these are saving
Well,
electricity.
right, that's what,
That's
it
the other-
isn't so much a
Biofuels.
new production technology as it is a
Right.
way of making an existing
Right.
technology.
Huge advances in lighting. There have been huge advances in efficiency. There's no, and the potential is
Yeah.
very, very large. And I guess biofuels is different because biofuels could be used in transportation as opposed to the other examples. Yep.
I'm not sure if you could comment it on now or later, but as somebody who's an undergrad engineer backward, I can't speak today, undergraduate
Yeah.
engineering background, I always have to wonder when I hear clean tech about the grid and the relationship with the,
Yeah.
how these are related
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
grid
yeah,
and the
okay.
condition that it's in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the grid is a big part of the efficiency thing that's going, and I think this bump up, right, in this period is also related to this idea called smart grid.
Right.
Which metering, home metering would be included in this category. And I probably should put up some definitional elements from
Yeah.
the, and if you want access to the Clean Tech database with all their definitions, I will be pleased to provide, even though I'm not supposed to. Because this is for science, for the purposes of science. Okay, so this is another look at how it goes. So now I want to look at, and this is again very crude, and what we want to do, and as I'll explain later on, we really want to do this in a systematic and rigorous fashion and actually do this with a regression analysis rather than these funny little lines and charts that I'm going to show you. But we want to know to what extent was there learning, those trends was there learning from the successes, number of M&As and IPOs in a category, learning from public policies. We have counts of public policies. It's a very crude measure. Joel Nalen, my PhD student, did these counts based on the IAEA data, which is the International Energy Agency, and all he did was that they list all the policies and he just counted them. So it doesn't say if they're big, small, good, bad, he just counted them. Okay.
So it matches the M&As and the IPOs.
Well, I'll show you in a minute. Yeah, well, that's true too. This is all count data. Right, absolutely, everything. And then the economic conditions, I have economic conditions, energy prices, and world economic growth as my economic conditions. And this is just the data that I have here. It is kind of interesting with the M&As and IPOs. There's virtually nothing happening in 2003 and 2004. And then it shoots up in all of these areas, but particularly in this is a count of both the M&As and IPOs. There's so few IPOs, it's mostly M&As. But it shoots up in 2005, 2006, and then goes down in 2007, and continues to go up in 2009. I'm not looking so much at the post-2009 period. This may be interesting in terms of predicting what's going to happen next if you believe the kind of propositions and assumptions and the logic of my thinking. So, and again, in all these cases, you see this ramp up in M&A IPO activity in solar, biofuels, wind, and to a lesser degree in energy efficiency. The energy efficiency ramp up occurs a little bit later. And okay, so that's the learning from successes. These are the counts of public policies. But I actually think this is kind of interesting because if you look at absolute numbers, they start from a low base, but solar starts from the lowest base and probably has the highest percentage increases. Biofuel starts from a higher base, and it's the absolute number, and that may be reflective of all the U.S. Kind of subsidies that have been given to biofuels over time. These are global data. I've combined in these counts both U.S. policies and policies in other nations. So it's
And these policies must be coded as being in some way supported rather than restricted.
yeah, I would think so too. Yeah, exactly. So they're subsidy policies, regulatory policies. There are other ways of breaking them down, by the way, and Joel does that. You can break them down you can break them down as market enhancing or technology inducing policies. He does that in some of the work that he's been doing. But this is just absolute counts. And it's interesting though that efficiency.
This is cumulative, it's not.
It's annual. These are, I think they're annual. It's U.S. and the rest of the world.
There's no retrogression in any of them as far as I can
Yeah,
see.
there isn't. And that's what's very, very interesting. That's what's very, very interesting. They keep growing, and there are large numbers of them, they keep growing. There are regulatory policies, subsidy policies, and that's one of the things, I was going to come to this at the end too, but when I looked at this, I thought that, and you'll see some of the graphs that I create in a minute, but I think this is very, very interesting, because I personally have always argued that a major constraint on the development of this sector, industry, whatever you call it, is public policy uncertainty. This does not suggest uncertainty. This suggests that there is gradual growth. And if you talk to people within these sectors, the subjective sense is that I can't do anything because I don't know where public policy is going to go. But the truth of the matter is that the public policy, if these numbers are correct, there are a lot of things. This is very preliminary. Yeah.
The devil is very much in the details.
Yes.
I mean, I'm on a city council in a suburb in the Twin Cities, and we do have policy uncertainty around renewable energy, I can affirm.
Yes.
I just heard Alex Class, who's a law school professor, talking about how solar policy is very local because it's not a scaled-up technology except in Arizona. And that was quite interesting versus wind or biofuel, which has got national policy and is kind of being ignored by local government. So if your policy isn't looking at local governments, the solar numbers especially might not make sense.
Yeah, this is very rough numbers. And for example, I think one of the biggest elements of uncertainty, if you talk to people who are trying to do this, they talk about the fact right now, who's going to be a governor of Minnesota? What's the Congress going to look like? That kind of uncertainty drives them crazy. And there was huge uncertainty over whether there's going to be a carbon cap and trade. That was another thing. A lot of them were anticipating it, and it didn't occur. So,
and some of these nominally supported policies, even though they might march along, there's still uncertainty because you may wonder if the policy is going to support the competing technology at your expense, right?
yes, right, and these are competing technologies to some degree. So these numbers are...
Wouldn't the number of policies be an index of uncertainty rather than stability? I'm not...
Well, that's actually another way of looking at it. They're very existence rather than removal. And you also have to look, I have a chart later on, the comparison to the subsidies that are given to conventional fuels. This is a very, very small amount in comparison. And there's always the uncertainty of whether it's going to be renewed or not, which doesn't occur as much because these subsidies to conventional fuels are buried in the tax code and they never move.
Right.
So, okay. So, and then the last thing that I wanted to look at was learning from economic conditions. And again, these are pretty crude numbers too, because we can do it by country, but you see the bloody economic decline that we experienced 2007, 2008, 2008, 2009. Another way of doing this would be percentage terms. It's also how you present these numbers in many different ways. The percentage growth versus the absolute world GDP growth. And then this is the price of oil per barrel. So the interesting period again is 2008, 2009, where oil prices spike and then they decline. Probably because these two obviously are related. World economic growth goes down, demand goes down. And this is an old story we've seen before. So then I learned how to do something in Excel, and I overdid it. So I got very enamored of doing these little graphs, which may be hard for you to entirely follow, but I will help you with them. Okay, so the solar portfolio is this line here, and that's what I'm interested in. And you see the spike up here between 2004 and 2005. You see a second spike up between 2007 and 2008. It's the most. The lines move the most of any of them, and then you see almost parallel to kind of before it. You see the spike up in M&A and IPO activity here, and then you see a slight spike up again, another spike in M&A and IPO activity, which kind of precedes a spike up in solar investment. So successes sort of driving this, And then you see the spike up in the price of energy, which is also maybe driving it. And then the decline in economic growth, which may be forcing it down. So these are like brakes and accelerators that are, I think, acting on this system of the portfolio investment. And here you see, these things are acting as brakes and accelerators. But, and then if I do biofuels, it's not as good as fit. It's mostly the M&A and IPO activity here. So the biofuel portfolio, this is the biofuel portfolio. And you see the spike up right here, 2004 to 2005. And you see M&As and IPOs also spiking up around this period of time. And then the M&As and IPOs go down. The investment in biofuels also go down. By the way, in the finance literature, it's actually in the management literature, to the extent that I have found an obvious predictor of any kind for venture capital activity of this nature, which I looked for very hard. It's unbelievable that it's not been studied, but the only article I found did say that it does track with IPO activity. So the IPOs are a very, very strong predictor of initial of investment. So it's kind of like, yeah, a lot of people are getting payoffs. Let's invest. That's the simple logic behind it. And this one, world GDP growth and policies. Again, see, always the policies in the way we're counting them just keep going up regardless of what happens. And maybe they're supporting the whole system as the economy tanks and oil price per barrel tanks. So this is not a good fit as solar, but still it's a pretty good fit with the idea of learning. But then, if I look at the portfolio, this is wind. And the wind portfolio here is this line here. So we see at the beginning it's very high, it falls, and then it levels off. And if you look at all the other indicators, if you look, for example, at wind, M&A, and IPOs, that's on its own trajectory. If you look at oil per barrel, it's its own trajectory. If you look at public policies, it's its own trajectory. It seems unaffected by any of these external learning components, that it's on a path, and the path continues, especially in this period here. And I don't know exactly what's happening here for this decline, but it seems to be on its own path without regard to any of these external elements that might lead to learning. And it's even more so in the case of efficiency. Efficiency, here's the efficiency portfolio. It's kind of flat through the whole period of time, and relatively indifferent to efficiency policies, indifferent to oil prices per barrel, GDP growth, and M&As and IPOs, which go up over time, while the efficiency investments sort of stay stable. Okay, so that's what I have, and right now this is very superficial, impressionistic evidence. So how do I interpret it? This is my tentative conclusions, and that's what they are. These are tentative conclusions. This idea of lock-in occurs to a greater extent in the case of wind and efficiency. They are indifferent to learning from observations of successes or external changes. Solar, in particular, and biofuel are moving up and down in response to these external changes. And as I said before, public policies seem to be growing regularly. They may have a steadying effect on all of this. And they're not a hindrance, as even Marcus argued back in 1984 in a very significant forgotten paper about public policy uncertainty and the development of this sector. So, why is this occurring? Now, this is just maybe it's a reasonable explanation of trying to explain it. But if you look at if you compare the various kinds of solar, and these are price ranges, high and low, in dollars per megawatt, and I guess the standard would be coal and maybe combined gas cycle and nuclear. And if you look at wind, wind is very competitive. Geothermal, which I haven't looked at, which I can look at in the future, but biofuel, quite competitive. But solar is not very competitive. So I would say that the movements up and down in solar in response to external circumstances are probably a result of the fact that wind is farthest from being economically competitive with conventional fuels. It's an explanation, an ad hoc, after-the-fact explanation, which we can, in our future work with the data we have, look at much more systematically. Yeah.
Important assumption there, and under your source.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I just in case people don't realize that you've got the subsidies in there, because
Yeah.
wind and coal would not look that way. if you
Yes.
didn't.
That's a very, especially coming from you, that's a very good qualification.
Oh, I
Because I had another paper which I had prices like this listed, which were probably did not include the subsidies. And it was a University of Chicago paper, interestingly enough, and it didn't look as pretty as this. But it still was, these are obviously, wind and biomass are closer in being competitive than solar. You know, solar is again, we might have this gigantic breakthrough tomorrow. We might be able to put solar, you know, on our sweaters and walk around and produce like our own electricities, and then, you know, there might be a gigantic breakthrough that will make it really inexpensive. But it's the realm of uncertainty and risk is much higher, and that's what I think. Even if these numbers are not exactly correct, it's very good.
Humphrey,
Yeah.
first is a very interesting paper, keep working on it. I would like to suggest something. To increase the demand for clean energy, either you do it through, as some have tried to do, regulatory or religious benediction to say why you do that.
Right.
And the other is the market approach. And I would suggest that the reason Europe is more aggressively on receiving end of the from end is the oil prices. You see, that's a very important part is that the efficiency level increases there when you compare the cost of the alternative.
Right, but of course,
And so it will be hard for public policy in the United States because I think the whole Congress will be replaced if you had changed anything with respect to the oil policy.
right. I mean, we tax, you know, from my perspective, we are under-taxing conventional energy.
Right.
And that's obvious, and it makes a hugely different environment. And the Europeans are also, they have the feeder tariffs, which subsidize non-conventional energy at very high levels. And that's the reason why this counter-public policies, all it suggests is that it's on the radar of public policy makers, and they're very active in the area. It doesn't really say that the policies are good or bad, or even the magnitude of their potential
Predictable
impact.
feed-in tariff.
Yes,
Predictable national
That's right.
level feed-in tariff.
that's right.
Completely different.
Exactly, and you're right, because Ontario now has a feed-in tariff, and what I've heard about Ontario is that it's totally chaotic and erratic, and people are not investing because of it, because they don't know if they can actually take advantage of it. Okay, so that's my, and this is just, this is another study I found from the Environmental Law Institute, and of course, what you would expect them to find, but if you look at federal subsidies in total, in comparison to fossil fuels, they find on a, I guess this is 2000, I don't think it's on an annual basis, but it's for the whole period, the fossil fuels obtained about 3/4 of the total subsidies provided, and most of the subsidies were going to biofuels in the United States as opposed to the solar solar and wind, and this was it's really in an area of tax breaks that they found where most of the subsidies to traditional fuels are going, and fossil fuels still constitutes more than 70% of our consumption. It would be interesting to get a view of Europe right now. I mean, it's not that much higher in Europe. And of course, we have these, one of the main policies that we have adopted in the U.S. is the renewable goals for various states, RPS, renewable performance standards that we have in the United States, here in Minnesota. Of course, it depends what you include and what you don't include. And if you include hydro, as we do, we're almost there, even though we have far-reaching goals. And
25% by 2020.
Yeah, 25, and NSP is 35%. And NSP is about halfway there because of hydro, because the fact is that about 50% of our power comes from Canada right now in the form of hydro. It's very hidden. If you look at actually NSP or Xcel Energy, does not tell you that directly usually. They try to exclude that from their typical way of discussing it. And a lot of the stimulus money, remember the big numbers on efficiency? A lot of the stimulus money actually went to efficiency, and it went to household refurbishing, household automation, putting in the new metering. Metering was a big part of it. And okay, and I'm done sort of. So this is the takeaways. The more risky a technology, the more there's more of this path creation, the more learning takes place from either success and failures. These are, I would say, what these are right now. These are propositions, because I've not systematically or rigorously proved this. These data are suggestive of that. I could write a case study for energy policy based a journal like that based on what I have now. And the less risky a technology, like wind and efficiency, the greater the lock-in path dependence. You just continue. You know that you have something that's going to probably work at some level. And the public policies, therefore, I would say, are actually engendering this path dependence. They're part of the supportive structure that leads to the path dependence and actually stabilize the investments in the more risky technologies.
Does this suggest that the taxpayer is being hung out to dry?
Well, this is the best I could do. Here, and this is my last one. The question: if this was done more systematically, rigorously. We were about to actually do a run of the data last week, then we realized we didn't have enough. When we looked at this global data with the country data, we didn't have enough data points to do it, according to one of my co-investigators, and so we're still working on building this. And I heard this from another one of my co-investigators this morning that we could have run it, and there are ways of dealing with the lack of data, but in any case, that's where we are, and hope to get the answer.
Well, Alfie, you timed it out just exactly our breakup time. So if people have additional questions or comments for Professor Marcus, please do approach him. But we always end on time, right at 2 o'clock, so we want to do that with our thanks to you, Alfred. Folks, please do come back. We have 3 terrific seminars left in this series this semester. Roger Schroeder also from the Carlson School is going to be speaking on high-performance manufacturing in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after that, Guillermo Neves from the Humphrey Institute will be speaking on sustainable coffee production. And then on December 7th, Derek Cohen will be talking about sexual violence during civil wars. So we hope to see you back again in a month.
Bob, do you think you could share you send them all out at once so I could schedule them?
Yeah, this the most recent version of Alfie's has been published.
Make sure
But I definitely will. I'm sorry? I will.
That was fascinating. I know I can't never let me see it.
Yeah, sure. I remember.
Good to see you. Yes, it's new role.
Beautiful slides. You know how to shut that off? You just click it and it goes off?
I don't know. I guess.
Wait till
I
they come
don't
down.
think we have to worry about it turning it off. It's getting it on.
Yes. Well, that's, I think it's part of the break the existing path. And that's, I have this other working on the issue of transmission in Minnesota that they're presenting. But nobody is really willing to step forward. And there was a moment, I think we actually lost that opportunity. Because now, I just went to a transmission conference. And it's become a war. And the people in the Northeast want their wind to come from offshore power, and they don't want to, they're afraid that they're going to have to pay us for their transmission, and then they're going to be captured. We're going to be the new Saudi Arabia, and they're going to, and it's militant. I was at this conference, transmission conference in DC 2 weeks ago, and the people I was from the Midwest. I felt like, I have to cower in a corner, that they were going to get at me. This has become an issue of no significance where it was all in our collective interest to come up with. And it's actually very stupid because offshore wind is very expensive. If we built the transmission lines and incentive there, it would be much less expensive.
So this is grid issues.
Yeah, grid issues.
This is looking all around all corners.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
It's terrific. I mean, there's so many, you could had several lifetimes of research just pursuing some of this. I'm
Yeah.
still thinking,
No,
I
this
mean,
is
you
my
know,
first,
Porter was, I was in graduate school,
but,
he made good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it
I
would
should
sound
get
like an
things
interesting
that
seminar to
say,
have. And so, on Tuesdays I always go over to INE.
You know, he sort of turned industrial organization
I'm a Humphrey student.
into business
Yeah.
strategy. The problem with is that it's a series of tantalizing ideas rather than demonstrating hypotheses.
And her son is a
So there's an awful lot about this co-location that idea, because it's, there is some evidence, but I'm still wondering.
Because
Okay,
I have another, the other thing, I am doing a piece
totally impressed.
from Eleanor Ostrom.
Yeah.
I know he had managed the Asian group, and it borrows from Williamson ad nauseum. So I have this piece that I'm working on, like what her contribution to clusters.
Oh,
And,
she does have a more social take on this.
yeah. I can send that, but we're still, every day I do some more work on this.
It was really quite revealing that Paul Krugman admitted when she won the Nobel
Right.
Prize.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
It's amazing that she's a second political scientist.
But she's a very, I think a very fine business. She gave the keynote address at some,
We had a better shot.
conference about a book, and she gave
Yeah.
some years of
Well, you know, if you go to the Nobel page, and they have her actual address when she won the Nobel, it's very nice. It's a great introduction to her work. Yeah.
I won't monopolize you,
No,
but
that's
thanks
okay.
again.
Yeah, and if you have any comments, just email me.
I was a bit surprised. Yeah, is your presentation?
Yeah, I can write that. Send me.
Sure. So,
Yeah.
the reason why is the governor would be interested in this as well as the head of the trade commission,
Yes.
trade,
Right.
Minnesota Trade
I agree
Department,
with you.
stuff like that. These people, I think even Kelleher, now that she's on this new tech thing, she's got to join everything.
Yeah. No, I heard, what's her name, Amy Klobuchar speak, and I sent
Yeah, I
my
know,
overhead.
Amy's very impressive.
Yeah, and I sent my overhead.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely, but she was really into this idea around it.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't know if she'll pay attention to it. That
No.
one-
Well, she's so busy with so many issues, you know, she doesn't have time to, she'll run it off to
Yeah.
some young kid that's
So
that.
if you have any contacts with the data, just send it to me. They should know that this has this problem. Just send them
Yeah,
that
I'll
line
have
up.
to. Again, I've been to the aerospace and architectural.
It's like it tunnels in the
Right.
ground.
And it was where, like the Elizabeth was
So, it's great to have you here.
What is this, that you're part of here? I saw your name and saw that your research was presented, so I was just.
I know Bob Cruder, it's Bob Cruder's seminar, there's some really good stuff, and I don't get the emails regularly.
Are you doing a Frontiers lecture?
No, but I should.
Yeah, you should.
And I told him to send it to Foley and asked him to, and he didn't even, I don't think he sent it out.
Well, are you back?
Because I thought people from that institute.
November the
It's
5th?
kind of a long haul over here to the West Bank.
Yeah, I know.
That's,
I'd be pleased.
I'm trying to get ready for that.
to
I will get over my
You try
jet
to get
lag.
into Frontiers?
periodically
No.
teaches on
Yes.
It looks, I
Yes.
think it's full
Oh,
for,
absolutely, it's very
correct,
successful.
but you'll still be working on this
Yeah,
this fall.
right.
Yeah, you should definitely be
Yeah.
testing this.
That's
stuff up
interesting.
there.
Yeah.
I will recommend it.
Yeah.
Very well
I don't
received.
have a whole lot of influence, but I have some.
Yeah. I'm not sure I like business stuff.
What's that?
In that whole group, I'm not sure. Are they even, they're tuned into
Hi,
that much?
did I shut this off,
What's
right?
there?
Yeah.
Oh, I think they.
I want you to shut off
I
and
don't know what you're.
log
doing.
out.
I think they would be.
It's still on.
John
Oh, it's off.
Foley does
Well, now it's
this.
on.
Minnesota,
Oh, no, it's just lights up.
Cargill,
It's still lights off.
all these different biomes.
Is this our laptop or?
I
believe so.
So we should really be doing more, but.
Lawyers.
Yeah.
That's what I would
Okay.
And this stuff too?
I'll take the camera,
Okay.
just shut it off.
Sure.